So I am Marianne Skorpanich from the County of Orange, and I want to welcome you on behalf of all the participating agencies that are launching this new effort called the South Orange County Water Quality Improvement Plan. Okay, what I'd like to do first is just do a brief review of the agenda to let you know what we'll be covering tonight. We're going to start out with the purpose and the ground rules for not only our first kickoff meeting tonight, but for the process overall. Then we're going to do a little bit of a background that talks about what the Clean Water Act, the federal law, says needs to be done, what it specifically says that needs to be done by cities and counties, which is the translation of which comes through our stormwater permit from the San Diego Regional Board. A little bit more background on that, as well as general planning process overview. Then we're going to cover a bit about what we call the watershed, and that is really, as you all know that live here in Orange County and Southern Orange County, there are a number of individual watersheds, but for the purposes of stormwater permitting, this is all the San Juan Hydrologic Unit from Laguna Beach down to San Clemente and up into the forest is considered the watershed management area that we'll be planning this improvement plan for. A little bit on what the conditions are here in the watershed and the availability of data that we have. One of the things that we're looking for in terms of this overall process is your participation. And a key thing that we're going to be doing tonight is a call for any data that you may have, either chemistry of the water, biology of the water, and so forth. We're going to describe a bit about the process in terms of something new, which is a consultation panel. And then we'll have an open forum to discuss not only next steps, but have some comments from the public here. And, you know, we truly believe in good governance and good government, and we think that that can't be done really without having a public participation component. And so built into this entire process of developing, reviewing, approving and implementing this plan will be a very active public participation. Some of that will come in the form of this consultation panel, but there's definitely a role for anyone else who's interested, who has data, who is concerned about our conditions in our watershed and wants to see improvements. This is a list of the participating agencies. So the County of Orange is helping to lead the effort, but it's definitely a partnership among all of the cities that are in South Orange County, as well as participation by Caltrans for a portion of this. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ken Cicillo from Geosyntec Consultants to take you through the next piece.
Again, Ken Cicillo, Geosyntec, and it's exciting to be starting another water quality improvement plan process. What I'm going to talk about a little bit, and I'll be popping in and up, I'll be facilitating the last part of this this evening. The purpose of tonight's workshop is to discuss the planning process and also the scope of what we're doing within the context of the water quality improvement plan. I want to introduce you to the watershed if you're not familiar, some of the nuances. As Marianne said, one of the key things is to solicit any data, information, recommendations that you all have that can help us with this process. We don't want to miss any information. We want to develop a feedback process that's meaningful. And so, as Marianne had alluded to, we have a combination of public workshops and consultation panels that will be public, that are multiple opportunities to provide input. You know, one of the objectives is to build working relationships, and this is hopefully a kickoff to doing that. So we wanted to start just with some ground rules as we get this going. We'll have multiple workshops and meetings, and wanted to just kind of mention that we want to listen carefully and respectfully, trying to understand different parties' views. Not everybody in this room has the same perspective on some of the issues that we're going to talk about, so we want to be respectful for that. We want to respect the time and take turns in speaking and share the time equitably to ensure participation of multiple people. So when we get to the end in particular, we'll ask that 3 to maybe 5 minutes, depending on how many speakers sign up, so that everybody gets an opportunity to speak. And we have extended the period at the end to 8:30 if you didn't notice. Some of the original announcements said it was going to end at 8. We want to refrain from blame or attacks and try to focus on problem solving. So it's sort of where we are now, moving forward. It's going to be the focus of the evening. As we go through the sort of presentation portion of the evening, would ask that your questions be clarifying. So if there's something that gets said that you don't understand or doesn't make sense, and you really need to get it understood before we move on to the next thing, please feel free to ask for that clarification. If there's a really hot button issue that we need to make sure it gets out there, we'll put it in a parking lot. But the real intent is that the dialogue and the Q&A comes after we've had a chance to at least share what we know, our understanding of the process, and the interactions that we hope to engage with you on. And I will flip this so we all remember the ground rules. And with that, I'll turn it over to Richard.
So thank you very much, Ken. I'm heard at the back of the room, I think. Yes. Okay, so I'm just going to give a primer or a primer on the background to the mandate. I did want to note on the way in, somebody has said to me, Richard, you're in a municipal environment. There is a drought. You're providing water in plastic bottles on an unsolicited basis. So it's deliberate. It's a test of your resolve in the conditions that we face. We've asked that the ornamental water feature be kept on. If you feel thirsty, just quietly step outside and quench your thirst. So by way of background, as Marianne had mentioned, we're involved with a regulatory compliance program, a federal mandate. The Clean Water Act establishes a prohibition on the discharge of pollutants through a point source unless the discharge is authorized by an NPDES permit, a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. And we are in the business of examining, understanding, mitigating the water pollution that arises for the urban landscape, which historically has always been thought of as a diffuse or a non-point source. But we got brought into this regulatory framework because typically at some point in the journey of the raindrop from the surface in the urban landscape that it falls on to a creek or a stream, it is discharged through a pipe. A point source becomes a point source, and the pipes are owned and managed by local agencies. So we've been brought into the regulatory framework of the Clean Water Act. So this is a little bit of a text-heavy slide. To many of you, this language is very well known. It establishes 3 obligations for the permit writer and for us as the regulated entity. The permit writer can issue, and we've got Christina and Laurie here with us, on a system or jurisdiction-wide basis. It has to include a requirement to effectively prohibit non-stormwater discharges. And out of DC, it's storm sewers. We call them storm drains here. And then third, it shall require controls to reduce the discharge of pollutants to the maximum extent practicable. And over the last 20 plus years, all of those words and sentences have been extensively pored over and pondered. And we've perhaps missed the catch-all, which is sort of provision 3.5 almost, plus anything else that Laurie and Christina and her colleagues deem appropriate for the control of pollutants. So they have a lot of discretion. Next permit go around, if they feel that we've not attracted sufficient number of people to the public process, they might write into the permit, we have to provide wine, cheese, and biscuits, because that would further the cause of addressing water quality. They have a lot of discretion. So we're embarking on a planning process. This is not new. So why have we asked you to come here? We're initiating a water quality improvement plan. It's different from prior exercises in that Laurie and her colleagues are seeking to shift the emphasis of what we do from a series of prescribed activities to specific water quality outcomes. The water quality plan needs to articulate and present very specific goals, those things that we're ultimately striving to achieve. And the reason you're here today, it needs to have an opportunity for genuine public participation. And I think what defines this exercise more than anything else is the focus on the target, what it is we're ultimately striving to achieve in each of the watersheds in South Orange County. So the water quality planning process, this process that we're on over the next 18 months, includes identifying the priority water quality conditions, the sources of pollutants, what is contributing to those conditions, all of the potential strategies and tactics that we can use to address and to manage the problem, a clear, unequivocal statement of goals, very specific strategies, and a schedule that we intend to adhere to achieve those goals, and then a rigorous monitoring and assessment program to support implementation of the strategy. So tonight we're just talking to launch the program. We're focused on the first three. As you stick with us over the next 18 months, the next time we convene as a public workshop, we'll start to talk about the goals, very specific strategies and schedules, and monitoring and assessment. So again, going back to the primer or the primer, South Orange County, the glowing orange line there marks the boundary in Orange County between the jurisdiction of the San Diego Board and the Santa Ana Board. So as we go forward talking about the WQIP in South Orange County, we're talking about that portion of the county, the southern third of the county, that's under the jurisdiction of the San Diego Regional Board. Santa Ana Board has a different conception, slightly different conception of how the planning and management process needs to develop. I like this definition of water quality. It's sort of like back in college defining all of your terms. But when we talk about water quality, historically we've talked about water quality as water chemistry, the concentrations, speciations, and physical partitions of organic and inorganic substances in the water. But increasingly, the focus is on realizing ecological outcomes that we measure through biological indices that give us an indication of the state of the overall ecology of a system. So water quality is chemistry, but it's also ecology. Stormwater. When the Portola expedition came up from San Diego, there was a recording of the landscapes and some observations by the diarist. And if you look at those writings, you see a landscape described that would look very much like this. In the natural condition of the rain that would fall on a natural catchment, most of it, or a third of it, typically would get immediately evapotranspired back to the atmosphere. A significant portion would infiltrate, and very little of the total rainfall amount would arrive in the stream as what was called Hortonian overland flow. So most of the stream flow in a natural condition is sustained by water reaching the channel via interflow, and there's very little surface, genuine fast surface runoff. So the landscape is transformed, and the take-home message on this slide really is the difference in surface flow between the unbuilt and the built environment. You now have parking lots and roadways, rooftops, driveways. So the hydrologic cycle is profoundly disturbed. A vastly greater proportion of the rainfall on a landscape now flows off immediately as surface flow to pipes. And it's entirely an artifact of the built environment. Without that imperviousness, as you would see, there's very little surface runoff generated in the natural landscape. So why are we concerned about this? You may have come across the term urban stream syndrome. Symptoms of urban streams, increases in the volume and velocity of runoff flow. Mike Beenan would always want us to recognize also that it means extended freshwater plumes out into the marine environment. There are changes in morphology. Either we engineered the channels to take these larger flows, or the natural channel is excised by significantly more erosive runoff. We incur pollution, and it can be visible like trash, or it can be invisible, bacteria, metals, oils and greases. And we change the ecology. So the outfall here, we've got excessive nuisance algal growth, a proliferation of biology, but there also can be a depletion of biology and ecology. The causes, as we've noted, imperviousness of the landscape. Modern drainage systems create a much greater density of drainage channels. Sources of pollution, the detritus of human existence, gets swept out when it rains. And we also have imported water now. And I did want to note, when I'm crediting John Peng, my colleague, I'm crediting him with some of the photography and the conception of the problem on the slide. I'm not crediting John with urban stream system, stream syndrome. So as we go through this process, as we seek to address urban stream syndrome with our planning process, we're going to be looking very much, I think now, at overall watershed hydrology, where we can put in through the development cycle or retrofit pervious rather than impervious surfaces. We're going to be dealing with creating opportunities for restoring the infiltrative capacity of the landscape, controlling pollutant sources either by structural means or regulatory non-structural means. We're going to be looking at harvest and use, how we can take a portion of the stormwater out of the landscape, out of that overall flow to the stream system, and maybe use it for landscape irrigation or other non-potable uses. We're going to continue to encourage people to, both our residents and our own agency colleagues, to invest in low maintenance landscaping that doesn't require inputs of chemicals and large quantities of water to sustain them. We're going to be looking at street sweeping, certainly, and we're also going to be looking at how we can possibly find opportunities in the municipal drainage infrastructure for restoration and rehabilitation. There are limits to the reach of local government, and we are focused on water quality, so we're not going to be dealing necessarily with air quality. We're not going to be focused necessarily on grey water and some other aspects of sustainability. We're focused on urban runoff and stormwater and this gradual reconstruction of the urban landscape to one that yields better outcomes for our stream systems. And I think that was it. The only other point I wanted to make was we are obviously aware that there is Proposition 1 funding being eventually coming down to support stormwater resource projects, putting stormwater more integrating it better into the water supply portfolio. So we will be looking at, as we develop this plan, how the plan can be used to meet some of the requirements of the Prop 1 funding and the stormwater resource plan requirements. And with that, unless there are any questions on the background, I'm just a few minutes before my scheduled finish. I'm going to hand it over to Mike and James.
Good evening, everyone. I'm James Fortuna. I supervise the monitoring program section for the county and wanted to talk to you a little bit about just overall watershed conditions, and Mike will pick up sort of what we're looking for as far as data, the data call as part of this process. So what we're trying to do today is kind of just outline the overall process that we're going to go through and just look at where we were at and where we're going over the next year or so with this process. So we included in the back of the room a State of the Environment report that was submitted to the San Diego board back in 2014. And this document kind of summarized where we were at back then, and it provided a comprehensive picture of the quality of South Orange County's creeks, rivers, bays, and coastal waters based on all the data we've collected and looked at throughout our process here of monitoring the environment. And it described some actions and recommendations that the Orange County Stormwater Program was taking, collectively the county and the cities, to protect and restore these resources, and outlined just our overall philosophy for the monitoring that we've done, as well as the major priorities we had at the time. So, you know, when looking at this document, without going through it in detail, we've got a number of things that we prioritize as part of this, and you can see on this document in Chapter 2 of the San Diego route, it basically outlays different pollutant categories that we looked at, such as bacteria or dissolved solids or nutrients and pesticides and metals and so forth, and looked at all the data we've collected, where it fits in with exceedances overall of different water quality standards, and prioritize, you know, where we saw persistent and widespread exceedances, which are outlaid in the red coloring in this figure, as well as in both channels, inland environments versus coastal environments, and also in dry and wet weather conditions, as well as other things that, like bioassessment studies, where we looked at the biology in the channels and various factors going into that. So, you know, we outlaid some priorities in there, but as part of this new process, over the first year of going through this, we are going to develop a phase 1 approach to look at, with a goal of identifying the highest priority conditions that are in the watersheds, and that could be the focus of targeted strategies for improvement. So we're moving on to the next sort of phase with that. And so the specific steps that we're going to go through and the types of needed information, you know, they're laid out in our 5th term permit, and that'll provide the overall roadmap for what we're doing. But, you know, a key part of that is sort of a phased approach that narrows the fields of problems and priorities, and I'll have a visual to kind of explain that on the next slide. You know, we're going to look at the existing data we have, which is quite extensive, all the information and analyses that we have, as well as some ongoing transitional monitoring program elements that we've implemented since the permit was adopted in April, and integrate all that information as part of this process. And as mentioned before, you know, there'll be multiple opportunities for input from the co-permittees, stakeholders, and other interested parties on this. And our colleagues in San Diego County have gone through this process, and you know, we'll have an opportunity to look at some of their experiences, what has worked well, and what you know, what we can use to help improve our process and maximize getting to those goals as fast as we can. And so some of the initial steps that we're going to do is, you know, as part of the building this prioritization, is identify the roles and responsibilities amongst the county, the cities, and other interested parties. You know, develop the schedule and clarify it, the timelines of when we're going to review data, develop products, and review those. You know, getting that stakeholder input, coordinating with the consultation panel that's going to be established through the process. And as Mike's going to allude to on you know, identifying the data and the information sources out there. You know, from the MS4 side, we have many annual reports, our report of waste discharge, special studies, and other facility information that we already have. We participate in regional monitoring efforts, such as the Stormwater Monitoring Coalition, or SMC, swamp data that's available, and other citizen monitoring effort that's going to all be part of this call for data. Look at other resources such as the basin plans, other listings in the that are out there, and just other known information and other sources of data that are out there to build into this overall prioritization process. And then, of course, the transitional monitoring, which includes some of the studies of looking at our different outfalls and their flow conditions, whether they have persistent flow, looking at some of our wet weather MS4 areas as well, too, and some studies along those lines. And what we're really trying to do, if you look at the base of this pyramid, which is sort of a stepwise prioritization process, is one, we're looking at the base just determining what are the receiving water conditions based on the data we have, and then what are those, from that point, what are the potential receiving water impacts from MS4 discharges in particular, and then look at building and determining the priority water quality conditions, and then from that prioritization, looking at the highest priority water quality conditions. Some early issues that we're going to likely encounter as part of this process is, you know, identifying all that data that's out there from all the key sources, going through a validation process for that data and integrating that in to the program, developing a logic for how we're going to prioritize things that make sense based on the data we have and the information that we can compile, and also looking at, you know, what sort of spatial scale are we going to look at the data? Are some issues widespread across the entire watershed management area, i.e. all of South Orange County? Are they on a watershed level, you know, say as Aliso Creek or Laguna Canyon Wash, or different watersheds, or are they on an individual storm drain level, you know, and looking at those pipes and if there's particular problems with certain areas. And then, you know, ensuring that as we go through this prioritization, you know, we link to the overall strategy for the WQIP as well. So that's sort of the overall process that we have going for this, and I'll turn it over to Mike to talk a little bit about the data that's going to be gathered. So.
Like James and everybody has mentioned here, that the stakeholder data is a top priority for us. As part of this process, we're welcoming additional data sources, information recommendations. They're all welcome. We want to gather as much information we can because we find it useful in filling the gaps and providing us additional background and context on the watershed itself. Especially looking for data the quality that meets some minimum criteria. You know, the data we'd like accompanied by information such as location, times, conditions, field and laboratory procedures that are being used. Also, if you know, we want the data at best data, high quality data is going to have you know, standard methods being used out in the field for collection and laboratory analysis. Also, data management procedures that guard against errors in transcription, and data quality that clearly assesses and describes the data itself, how it was collected, how it's being used, in what sort of context. The call for data, what are we looking for in the call for data? We're looking for current historical, physical, chemical, and biological data that provides assessment of the water quality conditions in general. We will be considering the additional data, like we said, focusing on the three things for this meeting that we brought forward, which is priority water quality conditions, sources of pollutants, and strategies for improving water quality. This is kind of the first cut at the data, what we're looking for. Data request, specifically, we're looking for that available, relevant, appropriately analyzed water quality data that would include, but not be limited to, data describing chemical constituents, water quality parameters, toxicity identification, both in the water column and in the sediments, trash impacts, bioassessments, and then information on the physical habitat. How we would prefer that data coming to us. We prefer that the data that's collected sent to us in an electronic format, either in a PDF or with an Excel spreadsheet. If they're large data sets, we'd like a summary report of what the water quality conditions are, recommendations for priorities and strategies within that large data set. And we have a number of large data sets that we've collected since 2001 ourselves, and the agencies have, and that's going to be part of that process too. Again, we have already compiled an extensive list of that agency data and materials under consideration. On the handout, we have a handout over on this table that describes more, what's back there, Julie? The data, how we would like to have that data sent to us, the list of the data, reports, information, projects that we already have, so that we're not sending in redundant data. And you go through that list, and if your information and data is not there, then we'd be more than happy to have that. The deadline for the data submittal is October 23rd, 2015, and we'd like the data to be sent to me, and that's my email there. If you're having problems with downloading the data, getting it in a format, any information you need on submitting data, or questions about the data itself that you have and whether it's usable, give me a call or send me an email, and I'll be happy to discuss it with you so we can gather, again, all the information that we can from you to fill in those gaps and broaden out the areas that we already know about the watershed, and we'll get some more into the details. Okay.
Mike?
Yes.
Do you want to give a mention to how people can see the data that we already have?
Yeah, at the bottom of that handout, there is a website that's actually our Dropbox that I am controlling. That has all the PDFs of all the lists of data. So again, we're gathering a library of data in that email address. Is actually, you can go to that library and see the data that we've already collected that's listed on that handout. So you can download that information yourself if you're looking for special reports or projects. So that's the other half of this, is we want to really get a library of data information reports just specifically for our South Orange County watershed management area.
We also have our data portal.
We also have a data portal. In fact, the data from that data portal I have put into our data download. So all the South County data that we've collected from 2001 all the way forward from our different programs is listed in that file or in that folder. So you don't necessarily have to go to our data portal site to get that data. So it's another way to get that data if you need it. Yeah, Rick.
Mike, two questions about the data. One is, as far as historical data, how far back are you? Are you looking for data as far back as people would have it, or
as far back as you have it, because it gives us a nice historical context.
And then the other question is, you didn't mention anything about flow, so I'm wondering about. I would think that both dry weather and wet weather flow data, especially when Richard was making the point about how conditions have changed over the years,
Sure.
It would be useful to have. What was the flow like under dry weather and what were their conditions in the past to the extent that.
Sure, we're looking for flow data. We have a vast amount of flow data because we capture that data from, back from early 2000s on at a number of stations, number of watersheds in South Orange County. But if somebody has additional flow data, maybe some of the sanitation districts do, maybe some of the other cities do, we would like that information.
Yes,
exactly.
U.S. monitoring stations are already showing us.
Excuse me?
The U.S. monitoring stations, they go even way further.
Right, you talk about historically?
Yeah.
Historically, they're very long,
That's
longer than 2000. Before that, way before that. Yes, Roger.
Yes, you put dissolved oxygen in the category of water quality, bioassessment, both?
I would say,
It showed DO up there.
I'd say water quality is one of the physical ones we had. We were talking about pH, electric activity, you know, in there. Yes, we'll take, we're
So
interested.
That was part of the et cetera.
Right, that's the etc. Yes, Mike.
Mike, you talked about minimum qualifications of data.
Mhm.
Are you requiring like a QA/QC or spike samples, and all this, or you just ask me for the certification, the state certification of the laboratory who did the analysis?
We would like,
To validate the data. Just make sure that's-
yeah, if you could explain the way you validated the data from your data set. So if you have spike samples, if you have some QA/QC type samples run with that, those samples that you collected out in the field, we want that information, or at least written that, you know, we have done this QA/QC in the field or in the laboratory. So we're not looking necessarily for it has to be exactly EPA, you know, criteria, standard methods criteria. If you have a citizen monitoring group or citizen scientists that are collecting the data and maybe working up at Laguna High School, well, we'll accept that data, but we may be asking more about how that data was prepared. We're not, you know, if I have questions about it, I'm going to call them directly and say, hey, let's find out how this data was prepared. So see if we can use it, see if it's high quality. We're looking for high quality, but we won't know what that is until we get the information.
Well, just to be fair, because you want to make sure that the data is valid.
Yeah,
So,
right.
It requires the data, the analysis is done by certified experts, which is the ELAB.
Right, ELAB certification,
So
sure,
we
from the
need-
state.
I mean, we have to have a standard to what kind of quality we receive this data. I come back and tell you, I went there and I took a sample and measured the pH using whatever equipment. I need to provide you more QA/QC and certification that these data are valid.
At this point, yeah, at this point, we're considering all data. Okay, so we want to see all the data that's out there, all the information, all the projects. We're going to make that determination of how valuable that data is once we've received it all and have a chance to look at it. We don't want to stop anybody from providing us data that says, oh, it doesn't meet a minimum criteria, so I'm not going to send it in. No, we want them to send it in. We're looking for basically everything, all the information you have that might help us give us a historical content. Yes.
So the purpose of the data is historical context, or is it a baseline, or is it a snapshot of current conditions, or all of them?
It's all of those. Any data you have, we're accepting. You know, we'd like you to qualify that data if you're sending it in to us, what it was for, what kind of context it was, what kind of program, what were you looking for, what were the results. If you have an assessment with that data, we'd like to look at that too. Okay, we're considering everything. We're not ruling anything out at this time. It's a data call for all the data.
If I might add.
Sure, go ahead, Ken.
One of the things, and again, we'll have time for questions. So just a little clarification. We are going to have a portion at the end of the evening to have a dialogue, so we're not going to lose that. But one thing to emphasize in this data call, as Richard had pointed out at the beginning in terms of the scope of what we're trying to do with this water quality improvement plan, one of the primary objectives is to establish what our priorities are. So this data is going to help us understand what's out there and what our priorities should be, and that's really one of the primary drivers for asking for this information. You good? Okay. All right, you guys are ahead of schedule. Yeah.
Have you reached out to agencies that you know are collecting data in South Orange County, or asked the regional board maybe who presented data to them saying, hey, look, we've been collecting, etc.?
Absolutely. You know, we sent out email last week to all the different agencies in South Orange County. Gone to the state's website and pulled reports. If you take a look at that list of references that we already have, it pulls from all the South County agencies and actually the regional board and state agencies, including the pesticides data that we get from the state of California. So, I mean, I'm not saying that we have it all, but we've definitely put ourselves out there to the different agencies that we know that are collecting data.
I mean, like organizations.
Right, all the, at least all the organizations that we know that are environmental organizations. We haven't gone there yet. We're having this meeting tonight. I'm going to collect the information, and then we're going for a data call, sending out to all the South County NGOs, citizen scientists, all the ones that we know about, to provide that information, that email too, where they can send us data.
So this is data call.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why the website is up there with all the information and one of the reasons why James started with what do we know right now based on the State of the Environment report that's a year old, was to give you a sense as to what work has been done and the foundation for that work. On the website, we also have a list of the other resources that we've identified. Sometimes the historical data, if you look at that list and you see my information has already helped support one of these documents, you don't need to collect it and compile it again. If you're not sure, you could contact Mike and ask about that. So the intent is really to tell you where we're starting from, but it's not from ground zero. We're starting from a point where we've done a significant amount of work. But we don't want to miss anything. So that's really the primary point. Did you guys have a question?
Yeah, as someone who was involved with the task force that created the permit in 2013 that led to this, one of the things I remember asking these questions, and I know Lori and Christina and some of the other people in staff, I think we had maybe just a 5-minute discussion and then we moved on. I'm kind of curious, some of the private landowners, especially the larger blocks, for instance, the ranch, and just to be specific, has the ranch been submitting, Rancho Michio, have they been submitting any kind of a database to you about things like the Cañada Gubernadora, San Juan Creek, or any other areas that their build out involves?
I haven't received, I'm not aware of any data that we've received that.
So one thing we can do right now, actually, in addition to emailing it, actually not right now. After we're done with the logistics of some of the formal parts of the presentation, we can start collecting this information and documenting it. So if there's some
appropriate question, Ken, for Lori and the regional board, do they require reports from private landowners?
Like what kind of reports?
Well, like all the kind of assessments that we're looking at, a database. In other words, because you can understand, Lori, with the giant swaths of Mission Viejo, Rancho Mission Viejo, they have giant swaths of land, and they, in other words, that would be important to be integrated into this larger picture. But if they're not mandated, in other words, if they're not required to supply, then you're missing a giant piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, well, they're not under permit by us, which require monitoring to comply with, discharge permit requirements. There's the land development requirements that are in place that require post-construction treatment control, BMPs, hydromod requirements. But once those structures are in, and the design and all the engineering's been done to determine what the efficiency of the pollutant removals are and the control of the hydromodification, there's no monitoring data that they have to submit to us. The jurisdictions are watching the receiving waters and the storm drain, the quality of the discharge from their MS4. So that's where the data comes, not from the ranch directly. There's been a lot of study and hydrologic studies done of the ranch to put in a watershed-based thinking of hydromodification and pollutant control. So I would assume they already have those reports, and that would be part of this data.
They're using SWAMP, they're using like the Corps of Engineer modeling and things like that. Okay,
Those are the jurisdictions,
so the co-permittees are really responsible for collecting any data, for monitoring, sampling,
Right.
and everything else, not the landowners per se.
Right,
Okay.
right. And I just want to add that to this particular data, when you guys talk about, the QAQC and the TIEs and all the list up there, we don't have too many members of the public straight away, or like Hostkeeper even has a certain level of sophistication when collecting data. But you really don't want to exclude anything, which is what I heard you say. But there's things like pictures, physical data, and I thought maybe that's where Roger would have piped up, where I've walked this creek or I've walked this area and I know this to be the case, and you want to be acceptable of that type of information. Trash cleanups, quantities of trash is not necessarily a, QA/QC data point, but is valuable. And, even like we've seen down in San Diego, some of the areas like the San Diego River about, counting homeless encampments and what sort of, translating it to how much bacteria could be present and things like that. So I don't want it to get so sophisticated that people think, oh, they got it all, what could I possibly add to what they don't already have? So just take it down a few notches and call Mike to see if what you have they could add to their data set. And when you say valuable, there's different values of data. It might not be those pristine data points that you need that have all this double, triple check to it, but it is valuable in some way to add to the overall picture of what the conditions of the water bodies are in the watershed. So I just want to add that to the mix.
Thanks. Again, the establishing the priority and the conditions is really what we're trying to do. So I was going to mention the photos, so thanks for mentioning that. And again, thanks James and Mike for the characterization and the data call information, and Richard for the that primer. One of the things that we also wanted to mention that we're asking for your data information recommendations. We talked extensively about water quality and that type of thing. Richard also talked briefly about some of the strategies that we would be employing. So that we also would like to, and there's a sort of a conventional suite for stormwater of best management practices that get applied. Some are non-structural, institutional programmatic things. Some are distributed, like you'll see Green Street types of things. Some are regional, like wetland basins and extended detention basins. Some are restoration projects. So if you have ideas on strategies as well, with respect and information, data recommendations in that world, we're also asking for that information. So the next step in terms of this evening is to talk about the opportunities for input. This is the first of 3 public workshops. I'll talk, and the data calls, again, just to help us define our conditions, our strategies, to look for data information recommendations. I'll talk briefly in a moment about the consultation panel, which will be a public process as well. As we go through the submittal of sections of this water quality improvement plan, we'll have regional board comment periods. And then we will also have to go through, because this is going to be a document that gets submitted on behalf of a number of public agencies, a public agency approval process. Many of those will be public, so you can go to your city and watch that happen. So multiple opportunities to provide your input in terms of the content of this, but we're trying to actually push a little bit harder now at the beginning so we can get your input and thoughts so we can incorporate them. Wanted to introduce Julie Riggio here. Just her contact information is there to help provide additional opportunities for input. So our tentative schedule, the first deadline, if you will, is October 23rd, and that's where we would like to collect the information that we've asked for tonight. We also are going to be asking for consultation panel applications, and I'll, again, mention that in a second. The rest of these are somewhat tentative, but you can see there's multiple opportunities, and the reason that we wanted to share this with you is to give you an idea of, again, the multiple opportunities to provide input. I believe this is in a handout, so we don't have to go through the details on this tonight. So we'll shift a little bit and talk about a consultation panel. So this process, development of the water quality improvement plan, includes the development of a consultation panel. And these are specifically designated people. There's a set of required members, but really the task of the consultation panel member is to provide detailed and thoughtful input and recommendation, to be part of the process. There are some required members, the regional board, a representative from the environmental community, and a representative from the development community. We want to make sure that we have somebody who is representing those interests on the consultation panel. Additional members we've seen in the past can be or have been EPA, business interests, individual residents, people from academia, people from the agricultural world, or others. And there's a core group that needs to be participating, and then depending on the watershed, we see different specific interests being represented. So it does require. Well, we'll talk a little bit about the process. So again, the interest forms are due on October 23rd. We have information regarding the consultation panel in terms of the expectations in an application form. Are they in the back now, or? They're up front, so you can pick one up at the end. If we go through this and you're still interested in doing this, feel free to pick it up. And I say that because it's not a trivial amount of work. I mean, we are going to spend a lot of time and effort collecting information, doing analysis, coming up with some very well thought through rationale and processes and action items. And so it's going to take some effort to understand the context, understand the process, understand what's happening and why. And that's really an expectation of the consultation panel. The selection of the consultation panel member will be done by the agencies, and the qualifications include things like knowing the watershed, knowing South Orange County coastal watersheds, understanding water quality issues in the MS4 permit. So if you're a consultation panel member, the expectation is a lot of the stuff that Richard talked about earlier is you're fairly knowledgeable about. And then understanding the challenges and opportunities associated with implementing water quality solutions. So recognizing that certain consultation panel members will have a hat to wear, so to speak. They're representing an interest. So that's, but then also having a practical understanding of what it takes to implement things is going to be a helpful attribute of a consultation panel member. So some of the responsibilities or commitments that members would be making would be, I guess it's an 18-month or 2-year commitment to participate. So the expectation isn't that you start and then you hand something off to somebody else, but that the same person kind of stays through in the process, because a lot of decisions and thought processes that kind of are built upon really need to be there at the beginning. We're going to have a number of meetings, maybe up to 5 meetings. You're going to have to review and provide recommendations on a number of drafts of sections of documents. And again, these are going to be fairly meaty and informationally full. And then, of course, as I said, to represent the views of your or the designated service category or organization or area of expertise. So before I move on with that, I guess wondering if you have any clarifying questions on consultation panel members, and I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add, Lori or Christina, on that in terms of the process, or if I missed anything.
I just want to kind of give you some perspective, like kind of flashing forward. I just want to give you some perspective and flash forward a little bit, because we're just getting ready to wrap the process up in San Diego County. In some of the plans we found all the way up to the end where when we were reviewing them, we found the plans didn't include or use some of the data that was provided by members of the public, flagged it very late in the process, and required the co-permittees in the watershed to go back and reevaluate the priorities based on some of the data that was brought forth through the consultation panel process by members of the public, and that either, to be fair, didn't show up into the report. Maybe, I don't know if it was on purpose or by accident, but the public process is a very important part of this process. So I just want to make you all aware that the consultation panel is important. It has some heavy lifting associated with it on the periods of time that the components come in. It's a kind of a staggered submittal process, but they do get looked at, and the input is important. And I hope, because I know I'm speaking to a lot of municipalities. I only see a small member of the public, truly members of the public. So I hope that the extension to get to other environmental groups and other local, boots on the ground groups happens as well, because probably 90% of the room is people that are really super familiar, or jurisdictions or municipalities or something like that, so.
Thank you. Previous slide? Before this one?
Yeah, the one before. Just looking at that, really willingness to learn about all the different items there. Can we just add, or at least we have an understanding, this correlation between water quality and water supply? Because we have people actually from the water district sitting here, and we need to make sure that is incorporated in our plan. We deal with watershed, and then basically there's a watershed for the water district, and municipalities that are looking for stormwater program and water quality mitigation plan. That we like to have that understanding of correlation between these two.
So I will ask that we put that in the next section. So if Julie or Lisa will make that a note. We're almost there for that part of it in terms of a comment or a suggestion related to the consultation panel. But integrate a knowledge of water supply. Okay. Any other clarifying questions? Anything unclear about the commitment or expectations? Roger.
I want to revisit the thing about landowners. And first, I should thank you for bringing up the thing about water districts. I know Mark's here. Mark's always here. Mark, come over down from Irvine just to hang with us. And see, things are good in South County. I mean, we're not the flatland people. I think it's important we have major landowners. I mean, for instance, in Aliso, I guess the most major private landowner would be the newly named ranch in Aliso Creek, formerly the Aliso Creek Inn. But you have, Rancho Mission Diego, Mission Diego Corp.
Package what you just said. Well, I think you're suggesting, because on the consultation panel we do have a representative from the development community, but and I think part of your recommendation is make sure they're at the table to provide their input. I think you're also saying make sure that we get, if they have monitoring information, that we reach out to them and obtain any monitoring information. And I think that was the crux. Marianne?
And I think the other piece I heard was, granted, this isn't a huge crowd here tonight. We recognize that not everybody can make it tonight to this particular meeting in this time and place. One of the reasons we're asking people to use the microphone is because we are videotaping this. We're going to have the meeting online, so anyone who could not make it tonight will have the will have the same information available to them. They'll understand what the data call is, what the call is for public participation, and so forth. So this is not our only effort here in this one time and place for 2 hours to try to engage the public and to get the data that may be out there that we don't already have our hands on. Okay.
Do you have a mechanism in place to reach out to these private developments? And secondly, how will we know that they were reached out to?
We have a general outreach program that uses a lot of different media, and so we're also hoping for word of mouth, because especially with just the general public and not the sort of institutional players, that's harder to reach. But we've done, news ads and so forth in all of the local papers in South Orange County, and online ads and so forth. So.
Is that something we should be considering? How can we help you to get more engagement?
That would be great. Thanks. Any other questions?
Every stream bed alteration permit or any of those, the regional board, when they issue the 401s, maybe somehow we can capture all the data through all the monitoring that gets submitted to the various agencies. I mean, there's a lot of good data out there that we don't see. They end up going to maybe the regional board or Fish and Game, etc., and they have 5 years monitoring. We know, he mentioned Lucas, but there are a lot of others, and they cover South Orange County, and we could find a lot of data. So maybe the question to the regional board is, do they track them somehow? Do they catalog them? Is there a way to access them? I mean, just a thought to follow up on what Roger's saying.
Well, to subsets of them, because I think you were asking about outreach in general and the development community, and I wanted Richard to share a little bit about, again, for this meeting, and I think Marianne already talked about, you know, kind of how accessible this meeting will be, but did you want to, and then you want to get to
I think we did a very credible outreach effort that involved advertising in all of the South Orange County newspapers, creation of website, email solicitations to all of the contact lists of all of the people that have ever expressed an interest in the programs we're doing. And social media, and I have my public relations expertise here with me. For me, there are a lot of municipal people here, but there are also a significant number who are not. I've been talking about stormwater to audiences periodically for probably since the start of the mandate, so just over 20 years. This is a personal best for me. I'm very proud that we got more than 3 people. And each time we think we do a very credible effort using all of the accepted media that are available to us. We are going to continue to outreach, as Marianne said. We have a specific set of web pages now. We use all of the other things that my daughters understand, but I don't. We want to genuinely get the information that's out there and have a process that genuinely involves people in the development of this plan for water quality for our coastal waters and our inland streams.
I tweeted this meeting. I don't know if any of you guys follow me. But if you have other suggestions on outreach, we can put those in terms of you know, suggestions that we can make a record of so that we don't miss opportunities to reach folks. Now,
You know, the way that social media work is you tell a group of people and then they tell people that they know and they tell people that they know. So yeah, there's definitely a role for all of you who are here tonight in terms of helping spread that word.
so what? But I wanted to get back to what Ziad was.
Regarding the time of the workshop, is that the best time? Do we need to go back to during the daytime? Evening? Just a thought.
Okay.
Good work, folks.
You've been through a number of these, so you can.
I'm just trying to help the process. It's usually the public meetings like these, the 3 or so that were on the list are usually in the evening to make it available for the public to come. The consultation panels were scheduled during the day. A lot of times they were more 3 to 5, maybe not necessarily a 6 to 8. So in regards to the 401 and the monitoring, I know they all have 5-year monitoring plans associated with them. What I'm not quite sure is how all that data is collected and organized and how accessible it is. Each certification has a number. It goes and gets filed in our office. I don't even know how we search them, if we search them by watershed yet or not, but I can find out.
Thanks. So I think that was another action on the, you got it, 401 certs. Okay, so actually we've got time for sort of open questions, suggestions with respect to data, information, recommendations, with respect to strategies, with respect to, again, if you have clarifying questions, you know, feel free to ask those. We'd like to just kind of open it up with anybody. Roger?
I just wanted to reemphasize what Ziad said, and Lori, I know that's a nightmare for you guys, but there must be some way, I don't know how to pull all that data out. I know that until recently, you guys were like, had to do archives, and I think Dave Barker complained about having to actually physically scan a lot of the almost Jurassic Park databases. But you have like another one, and I don't want to bring up a bad example, but since I'm well aware of it, into Harris Creek, they had Plano, the pump station for Santa Margarita Water District failed. 1 million gallons or something of sewage into that creek. Well, ironically, part of what they were required to do was not only a database immediately, ASAP, and I think that was ordered by the regional board, but they had to start doing assessment of the habitat and everything else. I think it was at least a mile or two downstream. I was just out there 2 weeks ago. And by the way, it is amazing how beautiful the habitat is. And that whole system has been completely rebuilt, part of it with, thank you, state grant money. But that's actually an excellent example of something that went awry. It was partly to do with the bending of the actual physical infrastructure of the pump lines and stuff crossing to Harris Creek out there by, what is it, the backside of, Mission Viejo. But there's a database there. But once again, Laura, I don't know, maybe when I come up with these stupid ideas, I have to figure out a way to, because once you collate everything, but I don't know how you crunch it all down into a database, because I'm almost like Richard saying, I mean, I know computers up to a point, but I don't know how to take that much data. I always thought, the more data you had, the better chance you had of success. But I'm not quite sure at a certain point you just don't wind up with a brain freeze because you literally got so much you don't even know what to do with it. You don't know how to make it all fit into the matrix.
Your dad figured that out.
I was just going to add, Roger, in regards to that incident, I was actually on the emergency response for that one. So, yeah, so I remember it vividly. And so we were a part of that process of, trying to capture as much sewage as we can from the watershed and being involved with what the other agencies involved, particularly Santa Margarita Water District, had going on with that. So there is involvement by the municipalities through all of our different programs we have, such as spill response or industrial inspections and so forth. So we do connect with different homeowners associations and other agencies when they have pollution issues and so forth. So that is incorporated already into our programs, and we can build on that information that we get through that process too. So I just wanted to.
That's an excellent example of how quickly, though, the creek literally tested, not only within, normal parameters, shit normal for there, but then how well it all restored. I mean, I don't know if you've gone down there recently, but it's beautiful. And they're almost done with the Plano station. They're hoping to get it done before it really starts pouring, but that's actually a success story.
So some of you may have seen this sign-up sheet so that we can kind of make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to provide some input to this meeting. Does anybody want to sort of say something formally here that hasn't signed up? Okay, then I'd like to invite Valerie McFall.
And I didn't realize it was going to be such an informal event, so I signed up. So
No, I appreciate it. We didn't know how many people would be wanting to invite.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I just wanted to provide the comment that as you go forward and draft this plan, and I do thank the county for including the public and agencies to be included in this tonight, but as you go forward and draft the plan, that you bring forward consistency as far as obligations for agencies and organizations in permit requirements, and that it also take into account in that consistency that timing for issuing of permits or other requirements are also considered, so we all have an equal level playing ground. It's very difficult as you try to build projects. You never know what the final outcome is going to be, and it becomes very costly. And I think as long as you continue to move forward with the water quality improvement plan, that you take into account all the different organizations that are going to be affected by this, and then you ensure that is consistent throughout. So when people design and build projects, they understand what they're getting into and can actually get to the end of it without not knowing where the obstacles are going to continue to move through the process.
So just to rephrase a little bit, you're talking about consistency, making sure people understand what the schedule is and what the obligations might be for anything that comes out of this plan. Right. Because what I talked about earlier was the idea of strategies being implemented, best management practices at multiple scales. So this is one of those instances where that could apply, and so that's a good comment. Wayne Brown.
Thank you. I'm somewhat in the same area. My name is Wayne Brown, and I'm here representing the South Orange County Economic Coalition. The South Orange County Economic Coalition has been a strong advocate for infrastructure projects needed to maintain and improve the economy, jobs, and quality of life for the people who work and live in South Orange County. In support of these efforts, the Economic Coalition is urging the San Diego Regional Water Quality Control Board not to move the goalposts in terms of its regulatory requirements. There must be clear requirements for developers and businesses who crave certainty and consistency as part of their long-term planning strategies. The San Diego Regional Water Quality Control Board should work more closely with the Santa Ana Regional Water Quality Control Board so that there is more regulatory consistency between the two boards. This is particularly impactful to cities like Lake Forest and Laguna Woods, where those cities have to comply with different and sometimes conflicting regulatory requirements in terms of water runoff. Come together. Get consistency. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. And our last public comment is Mary Ann Skorpanich.
I thought that was the sign. Yeah, certainly.
If I could. Okay. Mark Teddemer, Irvine Ranch Water District. So I've recently learned about Senate Bill 985. I think I have that right. And I'm curious to know how this effort comports with that effort. It's another sort of water quality plan. And can you briefly describe what the differences or similarities are both in outcomes and timing?
So this is the Stormwater Resource Plan? Do you want me to talk about that, or you want to talk about that?
I'd rather you
Okay.
talk because
Okay.
I did an analysis for staff, but it was like a month ago and it's just not on the
Okay.
cerebral cortex.
So the effort that we're undertaking here is required by our stormwater permit. And when I say our, it's the county and the cities that are covered under that one permit for South County. And the plan will be a series of actions and strategies that the cities and the county will undertake, will commit to, and it'll have a schedule, and it'll say these things are going to be done in this year, and these things are going to be done in that year, and here are all the things that need to get done. At the same time, in a parallel universe, if you will, the state legislature passed a bill that required, in order to get Proposition 1 funding for stormwater projects, or to get integrated regional water management plan grants that included any kind of stormwater components, that there also be something called a stormwater resource plan. And we've taken a look at that, and it overlaps very much with what we're trying to do in the water quality improvement plan. It has a few other pieces that would need to be added. So what we would eventually like to do is go through the process the regional board's requiring of us to come up with this plan and have a plan that meets those requirements, add to it to make it also qualify under the stormwater resource plan so that South Orange County, anyone in South Orange County could apply for that kind of funding, particularly that funding to implement the plan, which would be great. And then layered along with that is a more broad and diverse integrated regional water management plan, which we have for South Orange County, which includes not only water quality, but water supply, conservation, habitat, and so forth. So eventually, our long-term goal is to have all of that integrated together in a really comprehensive, but also in a very holistic way, so that we meet a number of different regulatory and legal requirements and funding requirements, and really have something that addresses the real priorities here in South Orange County. So, good question. Lori.
I'm also the grants coordinator for the San Diego Water Board. So one of my first duties as the supervisor for this unit was I actually provided comments to the state board on those draft guidelines for that funding. And that's exactly what my intention was, because I had the knowledge of what the water quality improvement plans required and provided my comments to the state board on that. So I was working from the inside to try to get these plans to marry up like Marianne is saying. So you essentially can do maybe one plan and have it comply with all three objectives. That's my goal. That was my goal when I was commenting on it.
And Lori, do you have a good feel right now in terms of what those elements that would need to be added or changed or modified within within the water quality improvement plans to meet that? I mean, you don't have to tell them.
I'm in the same boat as Richard over here. I did that a little while ago, so I think, and Marianne might know, I think the draft actually out on the street now? Yes. Okay, see, I thought that's what I saw float across the email, but because when I saw it, it was confidential in-house stuff. So the draft, so I don't have the answer to your question right off the top of my head.
Okay.
Input in terms of what our priorities should be, or ideas about conditions, or
Is there a data gap analysis anticipated at the end of the data collection process?
The question was, is there a data gap analysis that's going to be conducted? There is and you guys, I mean, if you want to answer, because a significant amount of work has been done. Part of this is part of that data gap analysis in terms of trying to understand what we don't know. Part of the water quality improvement plan, the actual plan itself, will potentially includes things like studies to fill gaps in data that we don't, technology-based or local, sub-watersheds or things that are happening. So there are, or source identification, for certain streams where we know that we're getting exceedances of bacteria, and so that can be part of both a data gap analysis and the best management practice. So I don't think it's a static, thing where we know. I don't think we're going to be in a position where we know everything we don't know in order to fill the gaps. But James or Mike, do you want to?
I would just say that, we have as part of this process, I touched on it briefly, was the transitional monitoring. So, part of that is going to every outfall we have, basically, in the MS4 in South Orange County on a routine basis over the first couple years of the permit. And so, in addition to all the data we've already collected over the years, obviously we have some long-term monitoring stations that have been in effect for a long time. It's important to get those long-term trend analysis for those stations, but we're also going to be looking throughout other areas too. And as we identify areas or problems or new areas of concern or areas that we haven't looked at as closely, the permit has opportunities to look at special studies for those areas and supplement areas where we could use more information before we can to make good decisions. So.
Yeah.
I have a question. I've been gone a year, but I know we have extreme drought here. So my question is the urban runoff problem still as bad as it has always been, or because of the extreme drought, we're looking wonderful on the streets of Drive? So just maybe a naive question.
Do you want to?
No, that's for everybody, anybody.
So I think we cover it in our State of the Environment report, but in dry weather in South Orange County, we see that we're meeting recreational contact standards in our channels in dry weather. And I think that's because the system is drying up. The biofilms that act as incubators for bacteria, they've gone. There's been a very obvious and clear reduction in irrigation runoff and those other things that have otherwise sustained the moisture in the system that led to incubation of bacteria. Wet weather is a huge challenge still, but dry weather, there's been a tangible, very significant improvement in
Actually, sorry, Richard. My question was about, is there still much urban runoff coming out? I mean, over-irrigation, etc. So part of the problem was that there's a lot of water, people don't care, and they're over-irrigating. But now with all the restriction and the
There's been a very marked reduction in flow, but that's not to say there's not more work to be done.
A lot of it's happening at night too, because you're no longer allowed to irrigate during the day, so we're not seeing it during the daylight hours.
Just back to the comment on the cities that has two limits. I represent the railway. I want to compliment actually the Boy Scouts because they work with us, and then right now the regional permit has an option for Laguna Woods and Laguna Hills to stay with the San Diego region, and then the other working with the Santa Ana region to move back Lake Forest to that. So it's still in the work. So we did work with the staff. We appreciate their support for that.
I was just curious if you're making plans to anticipate more data recovery this winter if we end up with the infamous El Nino and we end up getting a great surge of storm water through our tributaries. Are we making some kind of anticipated data recovery in these areas because of possibly more than a normal situation?
Absolutely. So we target to have a minimum number of storms that we sample, and already sort of putting those preparations together for what happens when the wet weather comes. And we've actually got some warm up here because we've had so much rainfall over the summer.
Also, I'd like to add that with the transitional monitoring program, there's a required wet weather component to the monitoring, so that every individual jurisdiction will be sampled a new storm drain, or where we haven't sampled before, a high priority storm drain for this transitional monitoring period to get not only flow but also information on the stormwater runoff and the constituents in that runoff. That's part of the transitional monitoring program that we're gearing up for. We have to even start sampling in October, the first rainstorms at some of these locations throughout the county that we've never done the wet monitoring before.
Okay, so there are a number of documents in the back that highlight, I think the slides are there. There's also the data call documentation, consultation panel briefings, and an application. Feedback forms for this meeting. If you want to give us your feedback, we do want to continuously improve on these public workshops. Information sheets, of course, the state of the environment summaries are back there as well. And then again, Julie is a primary point of contact for general information with respect to the process that we're going through now. Final comment from you, Bing?
I just have a question. So some of the different watershed management areas, they handled their consultation panel. Some of them had a selection process. Some of them went through and chose somebody. Some of them took everybody. Do you guys have an idea? Are you going to, depending on interest, select folks, or are you going to take everybody? Do you have an idea of how you're going to do that? What you're going to do?
Well, we are asking if they're going to represent a particular interest on the form, like what interest that would be. Did you want to add anything about the selection process? I mean, it's.
I accept bribes.
I'm already on.
But you guys need to pick.
You know what? That's one thing I want to share too.
Okay.
No.
It's on camera.
No. I just, Christina introduced herself. Christina Arias is going to be the lead water board staff on the water quality improvement plan for South Orange County. And we will have an additional staff person as her backup and technical support through the process. But I just want to let you know that Christina is the one that you guys will see regularly.
Is the board going, or Christina, is the board going to, the staff, I should say, going to have any kind of oversight / veto power over the selectees? And I just might as well say it, when the process was going on, as you know, I was opposed to these panels with the caveat, who picks the team? whoever picks the team, in a sense, picks the end game. And let me repeat, I was only opposed to the panels because my perception was it was quite possible, and I'm sorry, I actually said probable a couple of years ago, that the county in fact would pick, for instance, an NGO rep that would be a go-along to get along team player, and therefore it's just going to be business as usual. So I know we talked about this, but I was never quite clear, even after the permit was approved. What do you have any kind of, I don't want to say so, is that the best way to put it, about who the county appoints?
We haven't had to do that, and we're not, that's not our job with this
Okay.
particular.
Okay.
The
Maybe it's
process, we've established the criteria of who at a minimum needs to be on the consultation panel, water board, environmental community, and the BIA, or, so you could just default into that, San
You don't have to
Diego,
worry about
but
inviting the BIA.
member
issue.
of the, build and development community, but I just brought it up as a talking point because the groups down in San Diego, they all did it a little differently. Some of them took all the people who wanted to be in. They didn't have a selection process like that, and some of them did select only from, because there were multiple people that wanted to sit in the seat, to try to keep it more manageable and most effective. A smaller group is necessary, and there is a lot of heavy lifting that goes along with these reviews. So some people were really more qualified, but the process works where anybody in that particular group of interest would funnel all of their information through the point of contact. So it really doesn't exclude anyone from getting their information. You would just have to funnel it through your point of contact. So that's how the process is supposed to work.
And
That's how it worked in San Diego. And we didn't have any problems, and the water board is not going to be an arbitrator or deny or suggest who should be on the consultation panel. We already did that in the permit, in a general sense.
And again, the meetings are public. So a lot of times what will happen is the team that's preparing, I got you a sec, the team that's preparing the chapter that's going to be discussed will provide a briefing of it. For the benefit of the panel, but everybody else, the panel has actually already, by that time, read a first draft. And so they can ask very pointed questions about, what about this assumption or this process or that analysis. But it would be a public process too. We had a question or comment?
I'm a little on the outside now, so I'm going to say that you had so many panels in South Orange County and Orange County in the past 20 years where it has never been going along to get along. I mean, Rick has been part of so many things we've developed. We've always challenged ourselves and wanted to do better. So I think anybody who assumes that we're just doing to plug in and please the regional board is mistaken. South Orange County has truly pushed the envelope to improve within our means, within what we can, but we always wanted to improve. And our track record of, anything that's going to be developed is going to be reviewed, commented, public's going to have input. So this panel is not like they're going to decide in a back room and then that's it. So like you said, that's a public process and everybody is going to want to do better. So hopefully that's the end result.
Christina.
Just another something to add. We're talking about the water quality improvement plan development. Keep in mind also that there's lots of opportunity for public comment, because usually when we, when we're in the adoption process of like a tentative order, for example, we have one 30-day comment period. But for this process, there's actually 3 different 30-day public comment periods. So in San Diego, what the co-permittees did was they developed the first chapter, discussed it amongst the consultation panel, asked for comments from the consultation panel, and then the water board, we used our website to put it out for a 30-day public review. And then 6 months later, the next chapter became available, and we did it again. So in some instances, some parties were submitting the same comments. They still had comments on chapter 1, and so they resubmitted the comments. But anyways, my point is that there's a lot of opportunity to get whoever wants to make comments involved, not just the consultation panel.
Okay, any last questions before we adjourn? Richard, anything? Okay, well, thank you all.